Let me ask you something. If someone told you that you were already in the top 10% of all American households when it comes to wealth, would you believe them? If you're like most people who've spent 30 or 40 years saving carefully, the honest answer is probably no. And that's exactly what this video is about. Because there's a growing group of households in this country, millions of them, who have quietly crossed into seven-figure net worth territory, and almost none of them feel wealthy. They drive the same cars they've always driven. They shop the same grocery stores. They worry about their health insurance. They lie awake wondering whether their savings will actually last. And here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. That feeling, that cautious, careful, is this really enough feeling? It isn't a sign that something went wrong. It's actually a sign that you did a lot of things right. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why so many financially solid households don't feel financially solid and what that actually means for your retirement picture. We're going to look at the real numbers, the real reasons, and the one shift in thinking that makes all of it start to make sense. Stay with me, because this one is worth understanding completely. Let's start with something that might genuinely surprise you. The median net worth of an American household, that's the middle number, the exact midpoint, is roughly $192,000. That means half of all households in the country have less than that. Now, a net worth of around $1.9 million places a household in the top 10% of all Americans, and around $3.8 million puts a household in the top 5%. So if you have somewhere between $1 and $3 million in total assets, your home equity, your retirement accounts, any other savings, you are already ahead of somewhere between 80 and 90% of every household in this country. Let that sit for a moment, because if I told you that on the street, you might not believe me. And yet the data from the Federal Reserve is clear on this. That is what I mean when I say wealth in America has become invisible. The people who have it often don't recognize it, and the people around them can't see it either. Here's something else worth understanding, and the reason this gap exists between what the numbers say and what people actually feel goes deeper than you might expect. $1 million used to mean something very specific. For most of the 20th century, reaching $1 million net worth was genuinely extraordinary. It put you in rare company. It meant visible, substantial, life-changing wealth. But inflation quietly changed that. $1 million in 1985 carries the purchasing power of more than $3 million today. That benchmark that once represented the financial elite, it's now something that a disciplined middle-class saver working steadily for 30 or 40 years can actually reach. And that's not a criticism. That's actually remarkable. It means the path to financial security is more accessible than the old story suggested. But it also means the benchmark has shifted, and our feelings about wealth haven't fully caught up with that shift. Think about a teacher and a school administrator, married, living in a mid-sized city in Ohio. They never made high salaries, but they bought a home in 1994, contributed to their 403(b) accounts every year without fail, and stayed invested through every market dip along the way. At 64, they're looking at a combined net worth of just over $1.8 million. They don't feel wealthy. They're driving a 2017 Civic and clipping grocery coupons. But by every objective financial measure, they are. That household is not unusual. According to Fidelity, millions of American workers have quietly crossed the $1 million threshold in retirement savings alone, and many of them have no idea how rare that actually is. But here's where it gets interesting, because the reason so many households reach this level without noticing has everything to do with how the American retirement system changed over the past few decades. For most of the 20th century, if you worked for a company for 30 years, that company was largely responsible for funding your retirement. You had a pension, a guaranteed monthly check that arrived whether the market was up or down. That system has largely disappeared. What replaced it was the 401k and later the IRA. And that shift, quiet as it was, changed everything about how wealth shows up in people's lives. Because a 401k doesn't feel like wealth in the same way. You can't see it. You can't spend it easily. It sits in an account that you mostly leave alone and hope grows. And every dollar that goes into it is a dollar that doesn't change your daily life. It's a dollar you're buying your future self. Here's what that actually looks like in a real household. Imagine a postal worker, 61 years old, living in the suburbs of Nashville. Over a 35-year career, he contributed consistently to his thrift savings plan, the federal equivalent of a 401k. He also owns a home he bought in 2001 for $178,000, now worth around $390,000. He has about $85,000 in a regular brokerage account. Added up, roughly $1.3 million in retirement savings, $210,000 in home equity, $85,000 in other savings. Total net worth, approximately $1.6 million. His life looks completely ordinary. He's not going anywhere exotic for vacation. He drives a pickup truck that's 8 years old. He worries about whether his knee is going to need surgery and what that's going to cost. He is, by every financial measure, in the top 15% of American households, and he has almost no idea. Let's take a short step back from the numbers for a moment, because there's one piece of this picture that often gets overlooked, and it's sitting right underneath your feet. For millions of American households, one of the most powerful wealth-building tools they ever used wasn't a brokerage account or a sophisticated investment strategy. It was their house. Not because they were flipping properties or timing the market, simply because they bought a home, made their payments, and held on. A home purchased in a mid-size American city for $220,000 in 2002 might be worth $480,000 or more today. That's $260,000 in wealth created without a single active decision beyond staying put. Now, home ownership is not the only path to building a strong net worth. It isn't right for every household or every situation. But for the millions of Americans who did buy and who held through the difficult periods, that decision quietly added a significant chapter to their wealth story. And the important thing to understand is this. That wealth doesn't change how the grocery store feels. It doesn't change what you see when you look at your monthly checking account. It's real, but it's invisible in daily life. Which raises a question that gets to the heart of everything we're talking about today. If the wealth is real, why does the security still feel so far away? This is one of the most important things I want you to understand today. Having wealth and being able to use wealth are two very different things. For a household in their mid-50s, even one with a strong net worth on paper, much of that wealth may simply be inaccessible right now. Retirement accounts have age restrictions. Withdrawing early means penalties and taxes. Home equity requires either a sale or a loan to access. So you might have $1.4 million on a spreadsheet, but in your day-to-day life, your financial reality is still largely defined by your paycheck. That's not a failure. That's the system working exactly as designed. Money set aside for the future, staying set aside for the future. But it does explain why someone with a genuinely strong net worth can still feel financially squeezed in the present. When you've spent 30 or 40 years being careful, when discipline and caution are simply how you operate, that doesn't switch off the day your account balance crosses a certain threshold. Think of a 63-year-old woman in Colorado who spent her whole career as a high school principal. She saved aggressively, lived modestly, and built a retirement account worth $1.1 million. She also has $240,000 in home equity and $60,000 in savings. She's financially solid by any measure. But when her financial planner suggested she could comfortably take a trip to New Zealand she'd been putting off for 20 years, her first instinct was, not yet. That instinct, that not yet, is not irrational. It's the echo of the habits that built the wealth in the first place. Here's something that might surprise you. Even among households in the top 10% of net worth in America, many retirees draw almost nothing from their investment portfolios. According to research referenced by AARP, a large number of retirees allow Social Security to serve as their primary income source and leave their retirement accounts largely untouched year after year. Not because they can't access the money, but because they don't feel comfortable spending it. This is what researchers call the behavior gap, the space between what the numbers say is possible and what people are actually willing to do. And it creates a strange situation. Someone with $2 million in retirement savings could, using flexible withdrawal strategies, comfortably draw $100,000 or more per year. Combined with Social Security, that might mean $140,000 or $150,000 annually in retirement income. But many people in that exact position are living on $55,000 or $60,000 a year, not because they have to, but because spending from the portfolio feels like losing something they worked a lifetime to build. That's a real psychological tension, and it's worth naming it honestly. The wealth is there, the income potential is there. The barrier is often internal, not financial. And the reason that barrier is so hard to cross has a lot to do with what's waiting on the other side of the ledger, the costs that feel unpredictable and potentially enormous. Let's be honest about something. For a lot of people in this situation, the reason they hold on so tightly to their savings isn't just caution. It's one specific fear: healthcare. And that fear is not unfounded. Healthcare costs in the United States tend to rise at roughly 4 to 6% per year, faster than general inflation. For a couple retiring today at 63, Fidelity estimates they may need $300,000 or more over the course of their retirement just to cover out-of-pocket medical expenses. And that doesn't include long-term care. If one person in a couple eventually needs memory care or skilled nursing, which becomes a real possibility the longer you live, those costs can exceed $100,000 per year in today's dollars. That is a legitimate, serious risk, and it deserves a clear-eyed plan, not avoidance and not paralysis. Rather than letting healthcare anxiety bleed into every financial decision, think about creating a dedicated healthcare reserve, a separate bucket of savings, clearly labeled, set aside specifically for future medical costs. Not a guess, a real funded plan. When that bucket exists and has a number attached to it, something interesting happens. The rest of your portfolio starts to feel more available because you've already answered the question you were most afraid to ask. Longevity used to be the good news at the end of the story. You lived a long life, you got to see your grandchildren grow up, you had more time. But in retirement planning, longevity is also a risk, because a longer life means your savings need to stretch further than any previous generation planned for. According to the Social Security Administration, a 65-year-old woman today has a roughly 1 in 3 chance of living past 90. A married couple at 65 has about a 50% chance that at least one of them will reach their mid-90s. That means your retirement savings may need to last 30 years, or 35. That is a long time for money to hold. And when you're standing at 62 or 63, looking at your account balance and wondering if it's really enough, this is often the quiet fear underneath the question. Not, do I have enough for next year, but do I have enough for the year I turn 91? The honest answer, for many households in the middle-class wealthy range, is yes, if the money is used thoughtfully with a real income plan in place. But thoughtfully requires actually building that plan, not just watching the account balance and hoping. So let's talk about how this group, the middle-class wealthy, actually got here, because the path is simpler than most people expect, and, more important, it's more accessible than the story we usually tell about wealth. Here's the part of the story that I think gets overlooked the most. We have a very specific cultural image of what wealthy people look like: the corner office, the prestigious title, the salary that sounds like a made-up number. But that is not the most common path to seven-figure wealth in America. The most common path looks like this. You saved consistently, not just when things were good, but every single month, as a non-negotiable part of your financial life. You contributed to your retirement account. You stayed invested when the market dropped because you knew that the market recovering was part of the plan. You bought a home and held it, and every time your income went up a little, you made sure your savings went up a little too, rather than just upgrading your lifestyle to match. That gap between what you earn and what you spend, that is the engine. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make a good magazine cover. But according to Vanguard's long-term data on retirement outcomes, the households that consistently contributed even modest amounts across a full career dramatically outperformed households with higher incomes but inconsistent savings habits. Time, discipline, and compound growth. That's the engine that quietly built millions of middle-class millionaires. And this is where something really important comes into focus, because once you understand how this group got here, the question shifts from how did they build it to why is it so hard to actually use what they built. There's a transition in retirement that almost nobody prepares for. Not the logistical transition, filing for Social Security, rolling over accounts, adjusting your budget. Those are manageable. The harder transition is psychological. Spending decades as a careful, disciplined saver builds a very specific identity. You are the person who says no. You are the person who checks prices, skips upgrades, and finds satisfaction in watching the account balance grow. That identity served you extraordinarily well for 30 or 40 years, and then one day the job says you're done, and suddenly you're supposed to become a different kind of person, the kind who spends. That is genuinely hard, and I want to name it because I think a lot of people feel that difficulty and wonder if something is wrong with them. Nothing is wrong with you. You are experiencing the completely natural consequence of habits that worked. The challenge now is learning how to direct those same skills, the intentionality, the planning, the discipline, toward enjoying what you built, not just protecting it. One practical way to start: create a separate, clearly defined spending account. Not your emergency fund, not your healthcare reserve, a bucket you call freedom spending, or whatever name makes it feel real to you, specifically for experiences, time with family, or things you've cut off for too long. Give yourself permission to fill it and permission to use it. And this is where we arrive at something that I think is the most important insight in this entire conversation, the one that ties everything together. If you type the word wealthy into a search engine and look at the images, you'll see private jets, you'll see champagne, you'll see enormous houses and luxury cars, and people who look like they've never once worried about anything. That is not what wealth looks like for most people. Real wealth, the kind that millions of quietly successful American households have actually built, looks like a paid-off home or close to it. It looks like a retirement account that took 35 years to fill. It looks like the ability to say no to a job that makes you miserable, or yes to helping a grandchild with their first year of college. Real wealth is not a private jet. Real wealth is a Tuesday morning when you don't have to be anywhere you don't want to be. That's the version of wealth that the culture rarely shows you. But it's the version that millions of people in this country have actually built. And here's something I find genuinely worth sitting with. If you've been a consistent saver, a long-term homeowner, a steady investor through multiple market cycles, you may already be in that group. Even if it doesn't feel that way, even if the numbers still makes you nervous. Here is the most important thing I want you to hear today. The feeling of financial caution, that quiet anxiety, that sense that it might not be enough, is not evidence that you failed. It is not a sign that the numbers are wrong. It is the natural result of being the kind of person who took this seriously. You built this. You chose the consistent contribution when it was inconvenient. You held on through the market drops. You stayed in the home when it would have been easy to sell and spend the equity. You made the harder choice, year after year, for decades. That caution is not your enemy, but it is worth understanding clearly, because once you see it for what it is, you can start to make decisions that actually match your financial reality rather than the story your anxiety is telling you. According to the SSA, Social Security alone replaces only about 40% of pre-retirement income for average earners. For most households in the middle-class wealthy range, a real retirement income plan, one that includes a thoughtful draw from savings, a dedicated healthcare reserve, and a clear framework for spending, can provide genuine financial security and, importantly, genuine financial freedom. That word, freedom. That's what this was all for. At the beginning of this video, I asked you a question. If someone told you that you were already in the top 10% of American households by net worth, would you believe them? I hope by now the answer is a little closer to yes. Here's the full picture, as simply as I can put it. America has quietly created millions of households with seven-figure net worths, built not through inheritance or extraordinary salaries, but through decades of consistent saving, steady investing, home ownership, and time. These households are genuinely financially secure, and almost none of them feel that way because the wealth is largely invisible, tied up in retirement accounts and home equity, protected by habits of caution that took a lifetime to build. The feeling of uncertainty is real, but it doesn't match the numbers for most of this group. What I want you to take away from this, the one thing worth writing down, is this. The number in your retirement account represents something more than a balance. It represents every year you chose discipline over comfort, every time you stayed invested when it felt frightening, every upgrade you skipped, every choice that said, "My future matters." That number is real, and it deserves to be used with the same intentionality you used to build it. Not recklessly, not all at once, but with a real plan, a real income strategy, and genuine permission to live the life you saved for. If this video gave you something useful today, please save it because these concepts are worth coming back to. And if you know someone who's sitting quietly with that same cautious feeling, wondering if what they've built is really enough, share this with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear. I'll see you there.